It was subsequently in 2018 that I chose to drive alone into the thick forests of northern Oregon, a few hours from my home. I had been learning about this old, abandoned fire tower far in the woods near Mount Clayton, and I just could not help but feel a desire to see it for myself. There was a long, unmarked trail leading up to it, and I was eager to hike it, even though I was aware that I was technically trespassing. From what I'd found on the web, entering or camping there was illegal because the building hadn't been maintained in years and could potentially be hazardous. But the majority of what I read was that it seemed like it was safe enough, although the last post I could find was 4 years ago, so really, I had no idea what I was going to be getting myself into once I made it up there. After driving down the curvy back roads for a while, I was finally able to see a small ditch off the side where I could pull over and park. I stopped, turned off the engine, and rested for a minute or so, enjoying the quietness that filled the air. Then I grasped my backpack, loaded with rations for 2 days, hoisted it over my shoulder, and set out. Hikes such as this are frustrating. There were no actual paths to follow, no markers to guide the way. So I used my handheld satellite GPS to ensure that I was going in the correct direction, but in fact, I was hacking through tough, uncharted terrain the entire time. The woods were dense, the ground rough with downed branches and roots scattered about. The hike from where I had parked was posted at 4 or 5 hours, but every step was its own little challenge. The deeper I went in, the more wild it got. The trees grew more densely packed, the hills steeper in spots, and I found myself having to stop frequently to catch my breath or consult the GPS. I kept wondering about that fire tower and hoping it was still standing, strong enough to give me shelter. If not, I'd have to camp close by, which wasn't what I wanted but a possibility. The hours passed, and my legs started to feel heavy, and my shoulders ached from wearing my pack. I took a swig from my bottle and pressed on, hoping to arrive before dark. Lastly, and after what felt like an eternity, I saw it. The outline of the tower rose up from over the tops of the trees, and as I drew closer, I could see that it was still upright. The paint had long since peeled off, and the wood had weathered, but otherwise the building remained stable. I walked up to the beams that held it up and pushed on them a few times. They did not move. That gave me the nerve to give the ladder a try. It was metal, a bit rusty, and every step groaned under my weight, but it looked strong enough to hold me. As I ascended to the top, I was totally blown away by the view in front of me. The whole forest stretched out before me in every direction. No roads, no houses, no sign of civilization for miles. Just endless green. I stood there for a moment, absorbing it all. Then I made my way around the slim ledge and stepped into the lookout cabin. It was tiny, much smaller than the restored towers you sometimes see repurposed as tourist draws. This one was a one-room affair, maybe 150 square feet or so. There was a festering bed frame wedged into the corner and a falling-apart old wooden desk in the other corner, both with no integrity left. The windows, which composed the entire edge of the area, were broken and decaying along the edges. There was not much more to see, so I pulled my backpack off, unrolled my sleeping bag and mat, and fired up my little camping stove. The warm food tasted delicious after the walk. As the sun started to set, I returned out onto the ledge. The sky turned golden, and the forest below was aglow with the light of the dying day. It was possibly one of the most beautiful things I'd ever witnessed. The sunset lasted only a minute before darkness descended. Clouds rolled over, obscuring the moon and stars, and the forest was black as coal. I sat outside for a while, in the chill night air, enjoying the silence. Perhaps an hour passed before I spotted it, a faint light moving between the trees down below. I initially thought perhaps it was another camper, but something didn't seem quite right. The light was orangish, as if it were a flame rather than beaming like a flashlight. It resembled a torch, and that did not seem right. Who would be walking in these remote woods at night with a torch? The light flickered between the trees, close to the tower, and I watched it intently. It vanished behind a patch of thick forest and did not reappear. I stayed there, scanning around for another half an hour, but the light did not return. However, I remained on the ledge, trying to shake the odd feeling spreading in my chest. Later on, the wind picked up, and the cold seeped through my jacket, so I got up and took one last look before heading inside. That is when I saw him. Down below, in the center of the clearing between the tower and the edge of the forest, was one person. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there staring up at me. Maybe it was the same one who had the torch earlier. I couldn't say. But the fact that he was out there in the dark, in such a remote location, gave me goosebumps. I raised my hand, shouting at him, even though I hadn't known what I was shouting for. He did not react, did not blink. We just stood there, staring at one another in this eerie silence for an eternity that was actually only 10 or 15 seconds. Then he raised his hand, again this time in a gesture of acceptance, or maybe a sort of apology. I do not know. Without a word, he turned and walked back into the trees, disappearing into the darkness with no light to guide the way. It was deeply unsettling, but I explained to myself at the time that he was just another camper who had walked by the tower and wished to know if someone was staying in it. I stood outside for a few more minutes, looking into the blackness, but nothing else happened. Later, I returned indoors, zipped myself up in my sleeping bag, and attempted to heat up. The wind shook the old windows, and the wooden beams creaked above and below me, making it hard to sleep, but exhaustion ultimately prevailed. I have no clue how long elapsed before I woke up again. The wind had ceased, and all outside remained completely dark. My eyes snapped open in dismay, trying to comprehend why I woke up suddenly. That's when I heard it, the soft, familiar creak of the metal ladder in the distance outside. My body stiffened. I stretched out, praying desperately I was dreaming this. But it came again. And again, someone was climbing up. My chest started pounding with my heart as I sat up, straining to hear. The top step of the ladder groaned with every movement, every step a little louder, a little closer. I couldn't peer out. Nothing but blackness beyond the shattered panes. I unzipped my sleeping bag, adrenaline surging as I scrounged around in my backpack. I tumbled out onto the ledge, hands shaking, mind racing. The creaking accelerated, as if the climber was in a rush, and then, just as I was reaching the ledge, it stopped. Stillness. I remained motionless, barely breathing, waiting for some sign of movement. Slowly, I persuaded myself to move around the walkway, slowly making my way towards the corner where the ladder opening was. I leaned over and glanced down. Nobody. Nobody was there. The ladder was not being used. My heart pounded so hard I believed it would burst from my chest. I stood there stock still in terror and shock, not able to grasp what was happening. And then, out of nowhere, I heard rushing footsteps going around the wooden pathway behind me. I turned in time to witness a dark figure racing rapidly by the windows on the other side. That was enough. Automatically, I turned and started to climb down the ladder as fast as I could. It was probably the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. My whole body trembled as I rushed down the slippery metal rungs, desperate to get away. As I was approximately halfway down, I glanced up and noticed a head above the edge, gazing straight at me. I didn't hesitate. I just kept going, faster, not caring how loud I was or how clumsy I was. As soon as I landed, I sprinted into the forest. I didn't ease up until I was far enough in that it was absolutely impossible for me to be seen from the tower. My chest hurt, my breathing in gasps, but I pushed me forward. I have no clue why I grabbed my backpack when I stood up, but I can promise you that choice likely saved me. My GPS and flashlight were still in my possession, and with them, I was able to navigate back through the dark forest. The return walk to my vehicle was a blur. Every snap of a branch behind me made me jump, thinking that someone was following me. But to the best that I could figure, no one followed me. When I finally saw my vehicle again, I almost stumbled onto the sidewalk out of relief. I jumped in, closed the doors, and drove away without looking back. And I never did return to that woods again. I spent that weekend camping alongside a small remote lake out in northern Idaho. Truthfully, it wasn't actually supposed to be anything too big of a deal. Just a couple of days away from it all, out in the woods by the water, to get my head clear and unwind. The first day was just like that. I came in the morning, set up my tent, made a small fire, and the whole day did nothing but sit around, eat plain food, and watch the sky colors change as the sun went down. It was quite a secluded place. There was this little dirt path coming in, but it wasn't marked on any official maps. It was sort of one of those places that only locals would know about. My uncle would take me here when I was young, when I was about 10 or 11. In all of those years of traveling there, both with him initially and then later when I started traveling by myself, I never once saw another human out there. Never. No tents, no trash left behind, no far-off noises of individuals nearby. My own personal little pocket of wilderness. Well, during the second day, I did start to get restless and decided to stretch my legs a bit further. I walked for hours just circling the lake, letting my mind wander wherever it pleased. I've got an estimate that I did it 3 or 4 times. Each circuit was peaceful, me and the quiet. Then, however, in the later afternoon, things changed. On what was maybe my 4th circuit, I noticed something in the ground at the very edge where the trees started. Footprints. It stopped me in my tracks. I'd been circling the same route for hours and hadn't seen them before. And these weren't faint marks either. They were clear, fresh, and deep enough that they had to be recent. The weirdest part? They were barefoot, not boot prints or sandals, actual human feet, pressed right into the dirt. That gave me the shudders. The part of the lake I was on didn't have any easy means of accessing the water, so it's not like somebody removed their shoes to swim. And even if they did, I would have seen. The lake wasn't that big. I just stood there staring at those prints, trying to make sense of it. They led from the line of trees, stopped as if the person had just stood there gazing at the lake, and then turned and headed back into the trees. I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. I'd been out there all day and hadn't seen anyone. Were they following me the whole time, hiding just out of sight? That sat heavy in my chest. I debated with myself for a few minutes on whether or not I should take the trail, follow it, and see where it went. But the thick section of woods beyond that row of trees was unfamiliar, and quite frankly, I didn't particularly care to know what was in there waiting for me. So I went back and came back to camp. The rest of that afternoon, I was unable to relax. I kept glancing out into the woods, my eyes scanning the shadows for movement. As the sun started to set lower in the horizon, the tension mounted. I kept replaying the memory of those tracks in my mind. And no matter how many times I told myself that I was being paranoid, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was still out there, watching. By nightfall, I was jumpy. I put more wood on the fire, building it bigger than I usually did, just to push the darkness back a little farther. I tried to keep myself occupied, poking at the flames and trying to eat, but anything that made a noise made me jump. I kept telling myself I was paranoid, but deep down I knew something was off. And then, in the late evening, I heard it. Steps, deliberate but slow, out of the woods. My whole body froze. I looked towards the black trees, blinking to see. The steps came closer, and then I saw them step into the edge of the firelight. A couple, together, at the boundary of where light stopped and trees started. Their faces weren't really visible, just indistinct forms in the shifting light. I couldn't even hazard a guess if they were old or young. What struck me most was how still they stood, just standing there, gazing. I barely had the strength to inquire if they were in need of assistance, my voice parched and trembling. That's when the woman turned and took off running back into the shadows, disappearing between the trees without making a sound. But the man remained. He did not flinch, did not even glance back at her. That's when I saw his feet, bare, just like the prints I'd seen earlier. I insisted once more, my voice louder this time, trying to keep my tone even. And then, without a word, he turned and just walked back into the woods. The moment he vanished, It was as if my chest collapsed. My brain went into hyperdrive. The whole experience seemed unreal, like a bad dream. But it was real, and I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't going out there another minute. I frantically packed my equipment. I wasn't about to be that sort of character in horror stories and hang around to see what happens. Luckily, my gear was minimal. Just a tent, sleeping bag, and a few essentials. Within a couple of minutes, I'd packed everything into my backpack. I kicked out the firewood so that it would extinguish itself. Then I took up my flashlight and plodded straight into the woods to the trail back to my truck. The walk was supposed to be an hour or so, but those initial 10 minutes felt like forever. I just kept looking over my shoulder with every step, sure that I'd see someone following me. My heart was beating so loudly in my chest I could practically taste it. The deeper I went, though, the quieter it got. No crickets, no whistling leaves, just this dense, unnatural quiet. At about 40 minutes in, after I had begun to feel perhaps a little better, I heard it. Running footsteps, off to the left, about 100 feet away. I froze, shining my flashlight into the woods, but saw nothing. I urged myself to continue walking, but all of a sudden, in a matter of minutes, I could hear it again, this time off to my right, softly but unmistakable. Like whoever it was, they were circling. My mind immediately flashed back on those bare footprints. They must have been the ones, the man and the woman. And if they had followed me this far, I didn't care what they wanted. For the remainder of the walk, I could hear all these bursts of running, short bursts in the distance, as if they were playing with me, stalking me around the corner and then running out of sight before I could catch a glimpse of them. The entire walk was a nightmare. Every step, I would anticipate them bursting out of the trees. Somehow, though, I did manage. After nearly 2 hours, I finally saw the dim outline of my truck through the trees. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped my keys when I attempted to unlock the door. But I did get in, shut the doors behind me, and didn't ease up driving until I was in the nearest town miles away. I wish I knew more. I wish I could say who they were, what they were after, or even if they existed at all, but I can't. Sometimes I find myself wondering if they were even alive, or if they were something else altogether. All I know is, I never returned to that lake, and I never will. I'm a 25-year-old woman from southern Colorado. This happened approximately 3 years ago. I was then residing out of a small converted camper van and bouncing back and forth up and down the East Coast. A lot of folks live this kind of lifestyle in vans or RVs, especially that area, and I had really come to enjoy it. I always tried to avoid the big cities and camped mainly in small towns whenever I was traveling. But between you and me, my favorite thing of all was camping out deep in the backcountry. Being out in the middle of the woods with no one else around, that's where I felt most peaceful. There was something to that peaceful solitude that seemed safer to me than sneaking a camp in a crowded parking lot in some metropolis. Okay, it might still get a little creepy at night, but way down inside, I always figured I was safer out there with nobody around. I was traveling slowly between 2 larger cities in North Carolina. I wasn't in a rush. I loved taking the back route and stopping and staying at different campgrounds for 2 or 3 days at a stretch. It gave me the freedom, without any pressure, to get somewhere at a specific time. Today, I turned off the highway onto this small dirt road that cut way deep into the woods. There were a few small pull-off spots along the road, but none of those were utilized. It even appeared as though no one had ever been down that trail recently at all. I kept driving deeper in, hoping that I'd be able to locate a bigger and more remote spot to camp. Eventually, I reached the end of the trail, and there was a large, circular meadow. It wasn't scenery-type material, trees galore, but it was enormous, secluded, and serene. It even contained an old stone ring in the middle, where individuals have likely built campfires before. It felt totally right. I set my van on level ground, and I parked. Since it was mid-spring season in North Carolina, it rained nearly every day, so I assumed that I wouldn't be going out much. However, I cracked open the van's side door to let some fresh air in as I fixed myself a warm meal on my portable propane stove. I was close to sundown time, and I estimated that I still had a few hours before nightfall when I would be turning in. I cooked and dined while looking out at the darkening horizon and seeing the rain start coming down a bit harder. Approximately half an hour later, the sun fell below the horizon, and indeed, the rain strengthened. I shut the side door to avoid having water get inside, but left a small window partially open at the back of the van for airflow. I sat on my bed and started viewing a television series on my laptop to pass time. The sound of rain on the roof had always soothed me during my travels. But then, roughly halfway through my performance, a glare appeared on my laptop screen. A light was pouring in through the small open window behind me, reflecting directly onto the screen. Before I even had time to react, the light just vanished. It didn't vanish like it was heading somewhere. It just shut off, like the plug had been pulled. I turned around and looked out the window, but there was nothing, just darkness and the relentless patter of rain. I couldn't tell how close or far away that light was. I had no idea what it was. I tried to write it off initially. Maybe it was only some camper who drove through. Maybe their headlights were able to cut through the trees and shone into my van briefly before they turned off their car. But something was off. The light was from the direction where there were heavy woods only, not from the road that I had entered on. I even considered that perhaps there was another trail nearby that I hadn't noticed, but there wasn't much I could do to explore in that type of weather. So I just turned around and tried to get back into my show. Still, every other minute, I found myself pausing, peering out the windows, wondering if maybe I had really heard something outside. But with the rain banging on the metal roof, it was hard to tell if there was really anything going on outside or if my mind was merely playing tricks on me. Each time I glanced, however, I saw nothing. So I tried not to let my mind get the better of me. It was probably around 10 or 11 when I finally got settled into bed. I turned off all of the stuff in the van, closed all of the windows tightly, and pulled down the shades. The van grew nearly black inside, the way I usually preferred it when I slept. I crept under my blankets and tried to relax. But for some inexplicable reason, I couldn't sleep like I always do. My muscles were taut, my mind repeating repeatedly about that strange light that had shown up previously. And to make matters worse, the rain came down even harder, and the skies roared with thunderous outbursts of thunder. The van creaked every time the thunder boomed. Sleeping was not an option. An entire hour passed, maybe two, and I remained awake. That's when I heard it. Above the rain and thunder, I'm sure I heard the rustling of something or someone moving just outside my van. It was quiet, but unmistakable. It sounded like a person stepping on a branch and snapping it as they ran or moved quickly past my van. My heart started racing. I stood there frozen, my ears stretched, but then nothing. The storm drowned everything out again. I tried to look out the window, but it was so dark that I couldn't even see the ground right in front of me. The longer I looked into the darkness, the worse the feeling got. It was like I just knew in my head that someone was out there, staring back at me. There ran down my entire body a cold shiver, and I was quick to allow the window curtain drop back again. I had to be deluding myself, I thought. The storm must be getting the better of my mind. Then, however, a minute later, I became aware of something else. I heard a man's voice, not loud, but clear, a kind of raspily whispered remark as if speaking to someone beside him. My stomach dropped. I just sat there paralyzed, afraid to even raise the window shade again. I knew if I peeked, and they already had their eyes on me, they'd be able to see me for certain. But worse than that was knowing they must already suspect someone was inside. It was a van in the middle of nowhere. Who else would be parked here in the middle of a storm? I stiffened, my breath caught, praying that they'd simply go away. For a few minutes, the only sounds were the rain and a distant thunder rumble. Then I heard it, the creak of someone pressing against the side door of my van. The plastic creaked as though it was bending beneath someone's weight. My heart froze. Then the knock. A second later, the second knock. My whole body was frozen. I attempted to scream, but I couldn't. I knew that they already suspected someone was inside, but I was too afraid to say anything else. Maybe if they suspected 2 or more were inside, or if I were a man, they would not bother me. That was all I could hope. Knocking continued. Every few seconds, a new knock, always just soft enough to make it worse. 5 minutes passed, though it felt like an hour. They had to be soaked by now, standing out there in the storm, barely able to see anything. But then, suddenly, the man spoke again. He called out, saying he was from the sheriff's department and ordered me to open up. My heart pounded even harder. There was no way that I thought. Why hadn't he said that to me first? Why knock and whisper before announcing it? It was like some desperate trickery to get me to open the door without a fight. I lifted the edge of the window blind very slowly, barely enough to peer out. All I saw was the indistinct shape of a figure standing at the door. But from the shape and the way he came in, no badge, no uniform, nothing to signify law enforcement. And that's when I knew I was really in trouble. My mind went into high gear, considering possibilities. I could stay quiet and hope they left, or I could make a run. But every second that passed, the knocking became more insistent, more frantic. I could feel my window shaking with every hit. Lastly, I made my choice. I had to leave. I crawled into the driver's seat quietly, hoping they hadn't seen me yet. When I started up the van, I heard it, 2 sets of footsteps sprinting towards my van. They were coming fast. I floored the van into gear and started moving out, my hands trembling so hard I couldn't steer. As I walked, I noticed a person standing directly outside my window. They had a blur of rain for a face, but I felt them looking at me. I didn't stop. I continued to pushing the van through the muddy road, fearing I'd get stuck. But the wheels somehow kept turning, and I was moving again. As I drove off into the darkness, I looked around for some sign of a second vehicle. There was none. No truck, no automobile, only the empty road behind me. That's when the fear really set in. Whoever these individuals were, they hadn't arrived by automobile. They walked in, on foot, in the storm, which meant they'd gone out there with a purpose. Later, I filed a report with the county. Naturally, they told me no officers were in the area that night, and I never heard anything else about it afterward. No callback, no investigation. I still wonder about it sometimes, how close I came to something awful happening. I was fortunate that night, extremely fortunate. I never had anything like that happen since then, but I've never camped out so deep in the woods alone again.